Support for your public radio station comes from our members and from Mary Cariola Center, proud supporter of Connections with Evan Dawson, believing an informed and engaged community is a connected one. MaryCariola.org.
From WXXI News, this is Connections. I'm Evan Dawson. Our connection this hour is made in where you will find your next home. This is one of the hottest subjects in American politics right now. It is front and center in a new book about why Democrats in particular have failed to make life better in cities and states that they have governing power. The book is called Abundance, and the authors are self-avowed progressive Democrats who are tired of seeing sky-high housing prices in blue states and cities and too many rules about who can come in and who can't. They argue it's too expensive to buy a home, it costs too much to build new homes, there's too much regulation and too much NIMBYism for starters, which is why a recent email got our attention. The Pittsford Town Board voted in bipartisan fashion to create, in some ways, new housing opportunities. The Democrats on the town board praised their Republican colleagues in a town where debates about housing and about NIMBYism have been bitterly waged for years now. So what's going on in Pittsford? What might change going forward? How does this relate to the housing crisis in almost every part of our state and many parts of our country? And what they did goes beyond housing, of course. We're going to talk about a range of things, even microbrewing, which is new in Pittsford. So a lot to talk about here. And I realize when I say the word zoning codes, your ears or your eyes might glaze over. I urge you, I know it's not all that sexy, but zoning codes, this affects people everywhere. This really does matter. So what used to be this dry subject has suddenly become vital. Who gets to build and where? Who gets to live in what town or community? Who doesn't? My guest this hour includes Stephanie Townsend, council member for the Pittsford Town Board. Welcome back. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Evan. It's a pleasure to be here.
And Naveen Havnavar is with us, a council member for the Pittsford Town Board as well. Welcome back to the program, Naveen.
Thanks, Evan. Thanks for having us. Always great to be back.
And I should say it's not supposed to be a home game for you. I'll have to try to get even tougher with Naveen this hour. Naveen's part of the CAB, the Community Advisory Board for WXXI. Has nothing to do with why he was invited today. So just want to put that out there. Thanks for being back here. And let me just start by asking both of you. Stephanie, you reached out. I'll start with you about some of maybe the headlines. And the headline itself, Town of Pittsford enacts new zoning codes, doesn't sound all that sexy. But to wonks, to people who are like in the weeds, this is kind of a big deal, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's a big deal, and it's something that we've been working on for a number of years with a lot of community input. And to me, the headline really is that this reflects an inclusive and environmentally responsible approach to development for the town of Pittsford.
Okay, you agree with that, Naveen?
I agree with that. I mean, think about it. It started in 2019 with comprehensive plan being built around input from the community. And since then, there have been 3 or 4 town board members recycled before I came in at the tail end of it. So there has been a lot of community input, a lot of work, a lot of staff time. So very excited that this is completed in my term. And I had some hand in getting this through. Thank you.
And, Stephanie, we've talked to you, some of your colleagues, as Naveen says, in previous board configurations, and there hasn't always been a bipartisan outcome. And so as a Democrat, what was different this time around?
Well, I would say that there has been since 2018, which was when I came into office alongside Kevin Beckford, that there's been an immense amount of bipartisan consensus and collaboration. Our comprehensive plan, as Naveen mentioned, was adopted in 2019. That was a bipartisan comprehensive plan. The zoning code update is something that towns have to do after they update their comprehensive plan. Comp plans lay out a vision for land use, but then you need the policies that actually put it into play. This has been a very collaborative, community-driven process where we worked really hard to find common ground. Not everybody got everything they wanted, but what we have is a solid foundation for the future.
We're going to talk about exactly what that entails in just a second. Listeners, I would like to hear from you this hour. And again, this is not necessarily even just a show about Pittsford. We're going to talk to town board members there about what they are doing. But really the broader questions for me, for listeners is, do you feel that wherever you live Is it more of a place where YIMBYism exists or more NIMBYism exists? The not in my backyard or yes in my backyard? Is it hard where you live to see new housing built, multifamily perhaps, different income or prices and a mix of options? Or is it more exclusive? And what do you want to see? Is that how you like it? Or do you want to see some change? 844-295-TALK. It's toll free. 844-295-8255. 263-WXXI if you call from Rochester. 263-9994. And again, you can email the program, connections@wxxi.org. You can join the conversation on the YouTube page in the chat section if you're watching on the WXXI News YouTube right now. So here are some of the headlines and the new codes here. Creation of a mixed-use district that will permit development of a walkable area of commercial and multi-family housing. Expanded allowances for single-family attached housing to encourage the building of smaller homes. Provisions that support senior housing and aging in place. Preservation of green space and historic landmark buildings. Dark sky compliant lighting and environmentally responsible parking standards, and regulations to permit responsible keeping of backyard chickens and bees. Kind of a sneaky hot topic, it sounds like Pittsburgh.
Yes.
So we're going to get there. I didn't see microbrewing on the list. What did I miss?
Microbrewing is there as well. We now have codes that will allow microbreweries and micro distilleries in our commercial district.
So I'd like to kind of just walk down the list with both of you so you can explain a little bit more about what's coming. And again, if this feels a little parochial, I think my sense is every town, every village, every municipality has to answer these kinds of questions. What are we zoned for? What should we be zoned for? What's the effect on who can move here and who can't? Who can age here? Who can stay here? All of that. And so, number one, the creation of a mixed-use district that will permit development of a walkable area of commercial and multi-family housing. Tell us more about this. I'll start with Stephanie. And was this one controversial at all?
This was a big one. I would not say it was controversial, but it took a lot of work. In fact, it was one of the very first things when we started drafting code that we started with. This refers to the Monroe Avenue commercial corridor, which currently is was until Thursday night, zoned only for commercial purposes. This is being turned into what's called a mixed-use district, so it can be a combination of commercial and residential.
So Pittsford Plaza, that kind of
Pittsford Plaza area, the area across the street from it. So what might that look like? It could look like a lot of ways depending on the creativity of the developer. But I think in the most basic, imagine storefronts on the bottom and 1 or 2 floors of residential on top. The buildings would be brought closer to the street so that you don't have this wide expanse of a parking place. Parking would be in the back. It might also be laid out as sort of, if you imagine like these little streets coming off of Monroe Avenue, again, with commercial on the bottom, residential on top. Totally depends on the imagination and creativity of the developer.
So when I think of the Pittsford Plaza area, one thing I do not think about is walkable. But what you are describing, I think, is off of the main drag, more walkable streets, mixed use, a chance for you to live there, maybe walk to a shop, maybe walk to buy groceries. Yes?
That is exactly what we are talking about envisioning. This kind of housing is really attractive, interestingly, always to me, to 2 demographics. It's very attractive to millennials, and it's very attractive to retirees who are downsizing. So it also ends up having the consequence of creating this very vibrant, mixed-age, walkable neighborhood.
So I live in town. I want to live in the town, but I'm getting older. I'm an empty nester. Maybe I'm a widower or a widow, and I want an opportunity that's a little smaller, a little more manageable.
Yes.
And you're going to point to this kind of opportunity and say,
absolutely,
we're looking out for people who are in perhaps those categories too. Okay, so what was the opposition? When we talk multifamily, I'm going to speak, again, as someone who's never served on a town board, and I don't want to speak too far out of school. I want to tell you a little bit about perception and then get your take on it. One of the perceptions of a town like Pittsford is that it is a town that prioritizes larger houses, not apartment buildings, not multifamily, not opportunities to add on to what you have or add in-law units, et cetera. Everything is a big house, single house, big lots. And this headline is the opposite of that. So my perception is probably shared by some people who are listening.
Absolutely.
Okay.
First off, we have a lot more multifamily housing in Pittsford than a lot of people realize.
Okay, fair.
And we're adding more. A few years ago, the Kilbourne Place apartments and townhomes were built on East Avenue, just down from Fisher College. There is a planning application for another apartment building
Pittsford
that's
Oak.
in the planning stages right now. We've got duplexes, we've got triplexes, quadplexes around town, have had for decades.
So why has the Pittsford Plaza corridor not been zoned for housing then?
Because at the time that corridor was put into place, the idea of mixed use was not widespread. In fact, at that time, the trend was to exactly what we have there on Monroe Avenue. So it's not that there was opposition before, it's that I don't think it occurred to anybody. You know, a commercial area like Pittsford Plaza was the up and coming new thing. So over the decades, the needs and quite frankly, just the desires have changed. Demographic changes are happening. So this was an opportunity to re-envision what that corridor might look like.
Councilmember Hobnover, you want to add to that too?
Yeah, and the macroeconomics also changed, right?
Tell me more about that.
Well, people are retiring. We have increasing population of seniors. They are getting older. They cannot maintain big, large half an acre or an acre house, right? They want to downsize. Where do we send them, right? That opportunity was not there. With this, we are creating those mixed house opportunities for seniors to move out so that young families can move into these bigger lots or half an acre lot, and then creates the ongoing circle of housing usage and provides that opportunity for more and more housing in Pittsford. So
so let me add to that point that Naveen is making there. The second point on the list of what the town board has passed recently is expanded allowances for single-family attached housing to encourage the building of smaller homes. Mm-hmm. Why is the building of smaller homes something that might be attractive, Naveen?
Oh, take my own example. Before I came to Pittsford, I searched houses for 3 years, anywhere in Rochester. I didn't have kids yet, so I would have loved a starter home, right? And then when I had kids, I could have moved up. And this allows for that opportunity now. If there are more single-family, townhomes and duplexes, allows for new couples to come in, get into Pittsford, plan while the seniors are aging and moving out. They can plan their next move within Pittsford. The goal here is, if you come to Pittsford, you should retire in Pittsford. While retirement, the goal should not be how do we kick you out of Pittsford to our neighboring towns? How do we keep you in Pittsford? You have spent all your life there. You have paid taxes. Your kids went to school. You've done community service. And I think this plays into that area of we will take care of you, right? We're taking care of our seniors, taking care of young people coming in, and college students if they need housing, because we have pretty good colleges right next door.
You talk about young couples who don't have kids yet, or may choose not to, but are childless for the moment. I'm thinking of a 25-year-old couple. And Naveen, I was reading recently, I don't think this one was in Abundance, I think it was a review of Abundance, but it was this idea that we use the phrase starter homes a lot. And a starter home for 25-year-olds is pretty unaffordable now, unless you are generationally wealthy with a family that has a lot of money, or you're fortunate to be in a very high income bracket very early in your adulthood. The idea of buying a house at 25, even if you're married and there's two incomes, is out of reach for a lot of people. And you seem to be saying, although I don't want to put words in your mouth, that you recognize that in Pittsford and you want more opportunities for people in that category too to decide to live there if they're looking for a place and feel that the current market prices them out.
Yeah.
Is that true?
One thing to remember in this conversation, town board members cannot solve affordability. Market does, right? It's the truth. can we influence affordability? The one way to influence affordability is providing more supply than there is demand, right? If there is supply of smaller house where people can move out, then we now have larger house available for those couples to come in and occupy, and then not have to worry about spending $500,000 for a half an acre lot, right? So I think it creates that microcosm and allows for that opportunity, and I think that is where town board can influence. We cannot solve for affordability.
I don't want you to have to solve one of the biggest current crises in the country, Stephanie. You're only working in one place, but why do you think it is so hard to build new housing, whether it's in Rochester or in California or in places across the country? What are the dynamics in play there that have made it so difficult?
That's a excuse me, a big
Probably an unfair
big
question.
And I'm not an economist. I'm a community psychologist. But, a lot of it does come down to supply and demand. We stopped building as many houses a couple of decades ago. And this is something we see globally. We're not the only country facing this. But as we didn't build as many homes, then there was less supply, there's more demand, prices go up. We also sometimes have values that we hold equally important that work against each other. So Pittsford is actually a great example of that. Part of the reason the land costs so much in Pittsford is because we have done an amazing job of preserving agricultural land and green space. And I won't apologize for that.
Yeah,
that
admirable
is
goals.
Absolutely a staunch value in our community and something that more towns should be doing. But the fact is then you have less land available to build on.
And so what do you do with that?
And so what do you do with that land? And that's where we are almost to the point that every bit of land that can be developed has been developed. This is what it's referred to as build out. Mm-hmm. We have reached that point. So now it's how do we redevelop? And that's where something like the mixed use corridor on Monroe Avenue is so critical. That is how we bring in more housing, is by redeveloping that into something different. We also have to look at the infill issues. So that's where, you brought up about the single family attached homes. This is something that I'm very proud of and is a major step forward. Like I say, we have had duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes in Pittsford for decades, but they were only allowed in certain areas. So we have expanded the areas where that type of building can go in. And that's really important because a lot of the land we have left that can be built on, it's relatively small parcels that are maybe a little idiosyncratic in their shape. So developers look at it and say, I don't know how to put something there. But if they have more option for single family attached, which in our case means 4 units, no more than that. We're not talking apartment buildings. It's 4 units. Then they may be more likely to fill in those little pockets that we have.
Before I turn to your colleague, a couple of other points on this. First of all, I'm going to use the phrase NIMBYism, or any opposition to those attached dwellings, and any opposition among business owners on the commercial corridor saying, we don't want housing here. You didn't get any?
No, we didn't get any. I certainly didn't. I heard no pushback on that. This is something I think a lot of developers want to have available to them because, economically it just makes sense. And the pandemic certainly showed us this, that if you're a developer who owns a property like Pittsford Plaza or the plazas across the street from it, if that is entirely based on commercial and there's a commercial downturn, then your development is at risk and you're losing money. If it's only residential and there's a change in the housing market, you're also at risk. This balances the risk for the developers, so it's much safer for them. So I certainly hope that the multiple people who own properties in that corridor are going to be excited about this.
And then the other thing that I wanted to ask you, Stephanie, is one of the formula when you talk about supply and demand, and you talk about that over the last generation or so, we just have not seen housing supply keep pace. That's undeniably true. That's true here. That's true in many, many places across this country. And so what Klein and Thompson are writing in their book is they say that in response to that question of, well, what do we do? What they see on the federal level, again, not the local level, not the town board in Pittsford, which was a bipartisan effort to do what we're talking about here, but on the national level, what they see from this administration is a move towards scarcity, anti-abundance. What they say is we don't have enough housing, so instead of finding every way possible to build more housing, we're going to try to deport more people. We're going to, a lot of the immigrants, even undocumented people who are working jobs and trying to raise families, we don't have space for them. We're going to take them out of the equation, as opposed to what can we do to make housing more affordable for everybody and find ways to build more. And that's the mindset they want to see towns, states, and the country have. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. We need to look at how can we, and it's a balance. And I think that we found that balance in these codes. They are reasonable. They are sensible. They do not, the concern I heard at times was concern about don't encroach on my neighborhood. Nothing in these codes encroaches on an existing neighborhood. We were very thoughtful about how we did that. So yeah, we need reasonable policies, reasonable regulations. Sometimes overregulation does get in the way of progress. This
is a Democrat talking, by the way.
Yeah, I feel in Pittsford we have over the years, found that balance. Solar panels are a good example, just at the residential level. So I've owned 2 different homes in Pittsford. Both of them we put solar panels on, and the company that we worked with said they love doing work on houses in Pittsford because they said the solar permitting and the
Less red tape?
processes were so reasonable and easier to work with than many other towns. So I'm really proud about that as a representative of our town. I feel like our zoning codes, likewise, they're reasonable, they're sensible. The other thing to remember in this, though, is that your elected officials are not, in most circumstances, the ones who vote on whether or not a particular building gets built. That's done by the planning board. That planning board is made up of volunteers who live in the town, who dedicate incredible hours to making those determinations. Now, they have to do it within state law. They have to do it within the zoning code.
Sure.
So we create the framework, but they're the ones who make the determination.
But they're playing on the field that you create.
They are playing on the field that we create.
Yeah. Okay.
But sometimes people get a little confused about that, and they think the town board is making those decisions.
I see.
And there are only in fact, and even in the couple examples where we get more directly involved in an application to build something, even then it still goes through the planning board.
So in other words, you look at the commercial corridor, the town has stepped in, the board has stepped in to say, hey, multifamily housing is in play now, but you're not going to steer which projects happen and don't. That's up to the planning? Okay.
Well, and even the planning board can't. So they can't steer it. Like, it's all driven by a developer who comes forward and puts in an application.
Yeah.
If that application is within the rules that we've laid out, if it's determined to not have adverse impact on the environment, it's determined not to have adverse impact on neighboring the neighbors that are nearby, then so long as all the rules have been followed, the planning board will approve it. And there's a lot of back and forth between the planning board and the developer. But yeah, all of this depends. Towns don't build anything unless it's a town building.
Okay.
It depends on and so basically what these codes are is we're saying Pittsford's open for business. You want to redevelop, you have an opportunity now.
All right. You want to add to that, Naveen? Go ahead.
I want to go back to your NIMBY question for a quick second here.
Yeah.
Right. Did we get pushback? There is data right now. The data is that if you go to our public hearings and you see how many for or against that we received in Pittsburgh is a 10,000 strong people community, and we received less than 6 or 8 public comments in for or against what we were trying to push, right? So I think there is that consensus that was built, and that allowed for this the zoning code to be approved. Do I say, was there a NIMBY situation? I would not agree with that. However, we had a lot of conversations around creating in-law apartments within residential zoning, and we did get a little bit of a pushback. However, there are 2 aspects to remember in that matter. One is that we solved for making sure that if seniors wanted their kids to be with them and somehow allow for a little bit of privacy, and that was made possible. The second thing also to remember is that if the goal was to allow for in-law apartments and in-law apartments only, and how do you enforce once the in-law passes away or moves out, right? So it becomes a rental property. And I think that was some nervousness that the community showed about adding that piece of code for residential zoning. And then I think after thorough deliberation back and forth and finding consensus, we came to a point where we are now able to say that, hey, listen, we are able to create that space without having to worry about throwing resources from an enforcement perspective to go house and house look for rental properties. So I think that was one thing where it applies to some of the questions that you were asking there.
Okay. Do you want to add something there, Stephanie?
Yeah, that was one of my disappointments, I would say, is that Naveen and I had tried to advance some modest changes to our accessory dwelling unit code. So this is not new. This, whether you call them ADUs or you call them in-law suites or whatever you call them, they've been allowed in Pittsburgh for years. What I was wanting to do was to modify, clear up some ambiguity in the code, and B, allow for them to provide a little more independence. So whether that is a in-law who's living there, whether it's an adult child, whether it's an adult child with a disability who wants a little more privacy, that's what I was trying to do. So I was disappointed that there we did get a lot of pushback from residents because of this issue. They were concerned. I don't have a problem when it's your in-law, your kid, but what happens after that? And they were concerned about it becoming essentially a single-family home becomes a 2-family home. And that was the concern. So I was a little bit disappointed in that because there were a lot of assumptions about renters that are not borne out by the data. And so it was disappointing to hear those stereotypes, especially because personally, I don't know of anybody who bought a home when they were 22. We were all renters, most of us at one time. You know, my grandmother bought her first home. She was 72 years old. She was a children's librarian. She was a renter for the majority of her life. I don't think she was a threat to anybody's property values, you know. So
this is something you'd still like to address in the future then?
I would like to address it in the future. So yeah, it's a disappointment that we heard that this stereotype around renters, but it's also important for people to remember there's nothing in the code that prohibits rentals, nor can a town by law prohibit rentals. Our codes are about the size of the structure, how far it's set back, how much of the pavement, how much pavement is there. Things like that. We cannot, by law, regulate whether a building is owned, owner-occupied, or whether it is rented.
But through the code, you can discourage what would allow for more rentals.
Yeah, I suppose you could say that. Although it's interesting because we're in Pittsburgh, we have the unique situation of having a village. So it's important to know they have their own government, They have their own zoning code laws. What we're talking about today does
Town.
not apply to the village.
Yeah, yeah.
A lot of people are surprised to realize that about over 25% of homes in the village are rented. And not only that, but if you do, as Naveen and I have had to do, knock on a lot of doors, you realize a lot of what look like single-family homes are homes that have been divided into 2 apartments. They've not been a threat at all to the vibrancy or the quality of life in the village. So, yeah, but there are certain sort of housing types that are more likely to be rented than others. You know, you're not likely to rent a 7,000 square foot home. You're more likely to own it. You know, so in that regard, yeah, the possibility of rentals may be a little more attractive, but there's nothing in a code of any town that can declare this is owned or this is rented.
I have questions and comments from a wide range of angles from listeners as we talk about maybe the driest headline we'll have on Connections all year, and yet I think it's kind of sexy. Town of Pittsford enacts new zoning codes. Zoning codes matter. They absolutely do. And we're talking about why they matter, you know, where people can live, what the circumstances are, and the kind of the playing field that the town sets for that. So Pittsford did that in a bipartisan fashion recently. We're going to continue down the list, and we're going to work on your questions that pertain to things like supporting senior housing, aging in place, historic buildings, things like that. So a lot more with 2 members of the Pittsford Town Board, Stephanie Townsend, Naveen Havnavar, both with us in studio. We're coming right back on Connections.
Support for your public radio station comes from our members and from Seneca Grain and Bean, offering food-grade organic grains and beans grown in the Finger Lakes to wholesalers, restaurants, and consumers. More online at senecagrainandbean.com.
This is Connections. I'm Evan Dawson. So a number of questions to kind of work through here. First of all, a question on if Airbnbs exist in Pittsford or if that's been an issue at all. Stephanie, you got a smile on your face there.
Yes, they are permitted in the town. We have very few of them. We have at various points scanned to try to figure out how many we have. There has been some discussion about whether or not they need to be regulated. We occasionally have had some complaints, but those complaints are largely able to be dealt with by simply enforcing our existing codes. So if it's a noise complaint, we don't need to ban Airbnbs. We just need to enforce our noise code, things like that. So yes, we do have them.
Okay. Are they a problem or a challenge or an issue that town government's got to deal with at all in any way? Yes?
Yeah, absolutely. In part, though, I think what I really encourage people when they think about short-term rentals, which is the technical term for them, is focus on the actual community that you're talking about and don't extrapolate from something you've read in the news about something that's happened elsewhere. So one of the things that I hear people concerned about is, short-term rentals rise up, they increase housing costs because they're bought up and then people don't have a place to live. That's very true in a city like San Francisco. It's not true in Pittsford. Last time we scanned, we only found about 15 or 20 registered Airbnbs. Most of them, the owner lives in the house. Mm-hmm. So it's a very different situation. So just make sure you're looking at the particular community you're talking about and you're not, extrapolating in a way that doesn't make sense from communities that have very different circumstances.
Charlie emails to say, Evan, I moved to Pittsford from California in 1991. I bought a house on an acre that backs to Powder Mill Park. It cost me in 1991 $165,000. My house is now worth just north of $500,000. My son grew up here, has a professional 6-figure job, but cannot afford to live in the town he grew up in. I told him I would split a down payment on a house with him, and he refused. He is now moving to Japan with his wife to be able to afford a house. My daughter gave up and bought a house in the city, which she loves. But it's all just not right, in my opinion. I believe the saved farmland is a metaphorical moat around the town. Also, a neighbor once told me in regards to a proposed apartment complex next to tracks on Monroe Avenue, I don't want that riffraff moving in. I was floored. Where did I move to? That is from Charlie. Can I get both of you to? So there's a number of points there. Stephanie, I'll start with you, and then we'll move to Naveen, and let's take Charlie's points there. Go ahead.
So, yes, Charlie, housing costs have skyrocketed. It's great when you want to sell, not good when you want to buy. That's where these codes, by bringing in this mixed use zone, by making these single family attached homes more available, and the other apartment buildings that we've approved in recent years are part of the solution. So I would say we hear you. We're doing what we can. We need builders to now come and build what is allowed. So definitely hear that. The renter comment, yes, that's exactly what I was talking about earlier, that I'm very disappointed when I hear these assumptions that any development that has renters is going to bring property values down in a negative way, or bring people who you don't want living there, who don't, the sense they don't belong there. Completely and totally false.
Okay, Naveen?
Charlie, number one, I want you to stay in Pittsford. And I think this zoning code allows for that opportunity. Like Stephanie mentioned, we want developers to come. Pittsford is open for business. Please come build nice houses, mixed houses, and opportunity for Charlie to downsize when she decides to. Could this have been done 5, 10, 15 years ago, and now we could have had that opportunity? There are a lot of could have, should have. That's not happened. We are moving forward. The comment about comments about having apartment complexes and the riffraffs coming into town. We cannot focus on individual comments. We have to look at what the collective feels like, right? What is the collective coming to? Looking at these codes, the collective is saying, listen, I want to keep my property value high or up. I don't want to lose my property value by converting into multifamily units. Okay, sure. Well, we agreed on that. We have signed off on that. Now, we also have said we are going to provide mixed housing, which allows for that, bringing diversity into Pittsford. Now, one person saying they don't like it doesn't really work. The collective has loudly supported it by through their public comments and in our public hearing. So we have proof that Pittsford is changed a little bit in terms of how it looks at the overall social situations. So,
another listener wants to know, why do we still see so little diversity in Pittsford? Is that a fair observation? Stephanie, Naveen.
I can only speak for the Indian American community. It's one of the fastest growing community within Pittsford. The Asian American community is also interested. The Asian and Indian American communities usually have higher paying jobs, which allows for our ability to purchase homes in Pittsford. Now, I can only speak for that. We would love more diversity, and hopefully, when the new developers come in and build these houses, there is an affordable component to them. They're not right, so which allows for more diversity to come into Pittsford. If the average, so the medium income right now is, I don't know, 140,000, I think, or somewhere around that. As soon as we bring that down to 175, I think there will be more opportunity for more diversity to come into Pittsford. And that would be the goal.
Okay. You want to add to that, Stephanie? You agree with that?
Yeah, I would say that when you look at census data over the last 20 years, we are increasingly diversifying in terms of culture, race, ethnicity. What we have done, if developers will build what we have a vision for, that will, I think, bring some more economic diversity as well. So I would say we're doing what we can. and trying to demonstrate that Pittsford is a welcome and inclusive community.
I mean, you're starting from, I mean, not starting, time moves on, but you're operating from in a place that has a history that for decades had pretty significantly racist policies in regards to housing and how it operates. Fair? I mean,
I would disagree with that. I wouldn't disagree with that. I would ask a question of what policy are you talking about?
covenants, who can buy houses, who can live where.
That is not about, that was not town policy.
Village?
It was not village policy. So really, really important when people talk about inclusionary and exclusionary zoning to really focus on what is the policy and who controls it. So covenants and deed restrictions, town governments had no role in. Those were restrictions that a property owner attached to their deed that is filed with the county. That is between the property owner and the county.
But Pittsburgh had a lot of those, didn't they? Yeah, we're going back years.
There definitely were some. Most of them were based on income, not based on race. The home that I live in now, the deed from 1938, I think, had a restriction that the owner had to, make at least $10,000 or something. Also important to remember, those restrictions were thrown out by federal law back in the 1960s. So they are invalid and have been invalid for decades. We still live with the consequences of that, absolutely. And that's where our job is to figure out how do we move forward. And these codes are a way of doing that.
Okay. Anything you want to add there, Naveen?
No, I think she hit the nail on the head, right? There is an acknowledgement of policies, right? Bad things happened in the past. Now I think those are not enforceable. That's the key here, right? And luckily, because if those were enforceable, some of those are enforceable, I probably could not have get a house in Pittsburgh myself, right? But we have moved forward as a society, and I think we just have to look forward.
Yeah, I think another point, again, of it's all about the details. And that's why it's so important that people look at the details. So one thing that I still hear all the time, heard right after our public hearing when we voted on these, is about this myth that in Pittsford, there are minimum lot sizes. We have 5 residential zones, and minimum lot sizes are only in one of them. So this idea, it's not the town that is creating 1 acre lots and 3/4 acre lots and 3,000 square foot homes. It's the developers saying, I can build it and people will buy it. The codes don't require that. The only residential zone where we do have some kind of lot requirement, that is in what's called our suburban, our residential rural zone. Those are a very small part of Pittsford that border on our farmland. And it makes sense that you don't want an apartment building surrounding farmland. So that's the only place. But this idea that the codes restrict, require large lot sizes, no, and they never have.
All right, going to try to move faster because we got a lot to cover still. John in Pittsford says, can the panelists help me understand what happened with Comida tax breaks for Pittsford Oaks apartments that won't include set-asides for middle or lower income residents? I don't totally understand what happened. It would be helpful to hear if I misunderstood the process. John in Pittsford.
Great question, John. So yeah, he's referring to an apartment building that is in the planning process right now. They applied to Comida for some tax breaks. Comida granted those tax breaks, but did not require a set-aside. The set-aside, when we talk about subsidized housing, it is a subsidy given to the developer in exchange for them setting aside a certain percentage of units so that people who earn under a certain amount don't pay more than 30% of their income on their rent. What happened on that? That's Comida's decision. Again, towns do not have any control over those tax breaks. That is a decision by the Comida board. The Comida board members are appointed by the Monroe County Legislature. Towns have no say. I saw it as a missed opportunity. but
Yeah, at the
yeah,
same
wasn't
time, at the
wasn't
same
my
ti-
call.
Yeah, at the same time, Comida has certain goals for creating housing. I think that's their role in our community. Um, what went behind the scenes, we do not know. What their personal goals as a board were, we don't know. But like Stephanie said, it's a missed opportunity. We could have had some affordable housing there, and did not happen.
Let me try to cover everything else that's on the list here that we haven't gotten to yet. Backyard chickens and bees. I know a surprising amount of people who are very invested in this issue. So what's changing in Pittsford?
Absolutely. So, unfortunately, we probably heard more about backyard chickens than we did about affordable housing.
We did. We did.
And we really did. But what it comes down to is now you can, if you have a lot of less than 3 acres, you can have up to 6 chickens, so long as the coop is set at least 50 feet back from the property line. And there's some other regulations related to health and not infringing on your neighbors that are in there. If you have a property of 3 acres or more, you can have up to 12 chickens. At no place can there be roosters.
And what a perfect time for that now. What a perfect time when the eggs prices are going up. Right? Hey, you have opportunity of
I
keeping
think egg
back your
prices
chickens.
peaked at the end of February. I think they're actually back down, but not down to anything that's low. I think that they just maxed out in the stratosphere at the end of February, and they're now just really high. But yes, I
Yes,
take the
yeah.
point. So people are very interested. Now, what about bees?
The bees was not at all controversial, but it had come to our attention that there was some ambiguity, probably in every town's code, around bees and are they livestock or not. So we put in some code that allows beekeeping to make clear that they are not livestock or agricultural.
Okay. And do you agree, by the way, that the chickens thing is at least partially because of the timing of the egg prices right now? Is that part of it, you think?
I don't know. It's been growing for a long time.
I think Naveen was being cheeky.
Yeah, he was being cheeky. And part of that there, we had to reassure people, look, there have been backyard chickens in Pittsburgh for ages. They just were under the radar. The house I used to live in, we had 3 neighbors who had chickens. So we just said, let's put in reasonable and sensible regulations to
And-
make sure
Yeah.
that it's health and safety and doesn't infringe on the neighbor.
And also protect the neighbors. If a neighbor is not happy with the other neighbor keeping chickens, let's give them some protection. 50 feet from the lot line is great.
All right, we got to go fast. I bet you we can do this in 30 seconds. What is dark sky compliant lighting and environmentally responsible parking standards?
So dark sky compliant lighting is basically making less light pollution. Dark sky compliant, you can Google it. You'll find that there's all sorts of standards about the light and can it shoot up in the sky versus down to the ground. So our codes are dark sky compliant. Parking regulations, every green infrastructure you can imagine, certainly that I've ever run across, are now in our parking lot codes. So that has to do with water runoff, planting lots of trees, so there's a good tree canopy around it, things like that.
Allowing for solar panels on some of
Yeah,
the
allowing
covered-
solar panels as
covered.
accessory structures on parking. The pavement itself, we're incentivizing what's called pervious pavement, which allows the stormwater to go through the pavement instead of running off. That's been incentivized in our new code.
And microbrewing coming to Pittsford?
Yeah, microbreweries and microdistilleries we now have codes for. So in the Monroe Avenue mixed-use corridor. So if you're interested in opening up a microbrewery or a microdistillery, check out the new codes. They'll be online shortly.
Let me close with this. Joel writes to say, he says, the town can argue for income-based housing. The town of Pittsford is not necessarily innocent. Class-based actions have been in play for as long as my parents have lived in Pittsford. That's Joel. Can the town argue for income-based housing?
We can, the best way we can do it is we can support any applications that come to Comida and them requiring it. So, we don't have the infrastructure to be auditing developers and checking to make sure they're in compliance. Comida does.
Okay.
And that is the office set up for specifically that, allowing more housing opportunities for and also giving developers opportunities to create those housing Lots.
So, Naveen, as we close here, about 30 seconds, do you think one of the headlines in 3 to 5 years from now, when we look back at the impact of this, will be a more inclusive Pittsford?
I think so. I'm hoping that developers come in and build houses based on the layouts that we have proposed in this code, and that are more affordable and allows for new families and allows for our seniors to stay in Pittsford. And that is a very, very important topic for me personally, because I see a lot of neighbors wanting to move.
And Stephanie, we're going to hear the music soon, but affordable means different things to different people. I understand
It does.
that, but some final thoughts from you on that.
Yeah, to me, I think that we made progress in these codes, and just as important, possibly more, is how we did it. We engaged the community, we found common ground, we built consensus, and it shows that Democrats and bipartisan government can work.
Thank you for coming in and talking about that at length, for answering every question, no preconditions. Your colleagues on the board, the supervisor, hey, the village government, town boards and villages, you ought to be in here more often, because this is a Pittsford story today, but as you can hear, the reason that there's all this interest is this is a story that affects people in their own towns, and they want to know how government works, and the transparency here really matters. So I want to thank our guest, Stephanie Townsend, council member for the Pittsford Town Board. Thank you for being here.
Evan.
And also council member Naveen Habnavar, thank you for being here as well.
Thank you for having us.
More connections coming up in a moment.
This program is a production of WXXI Public Radio. The views expressed do not necessarily represent those of this station, its staff, management, or underwriters. The broadcast is meant for the private use of our audience. Any rebroadcast or use in another medium without expressed written consent of WXXI is strictly prohibited. Connections with Evan Dawson is available as a podcast. Just click on the Connections link at WXXInews.org.